My name is Michael, and this whole thing started the moment cops burst into my house. I was standing in the kitchen in a t-shirt and jeans, not even wearing socks, when two officers told me I was under arrest for allegedly molesting my stepdaughter. It sounded so absurd that I actually laughed. But the laugh didn't last. They twisted my arms behind my back, snapped on the cuffs, and that's when I heard my wife Alice crying. Worse than that was the silence from my stepdaughter, Hannah. She was sitting on the couch, hugging her knees, not even looking at me. I didn't know yet that she had already given testimony against me. At the station, I felt like I'd been dropped into some cheap crime drama. A table, a lamp, two detectives staring at me like I was already guilty. They kept asking the same question over and over. Did I admit to touching the child? I couldn't believe I had to defend myself against something so vile. The interrogation went on for hours. They pressed, twisted my words, hinted that if I confessed now, I'd get a lighter sentence. I nearly lost it, almost started yelling, but I knew any outburst would just make me look like the aggressive stepdad they wanted me to be. So I just sat there, repeating, I didn't do it. And every time I said it, the words sounded less convincing, even to myself. When they finally let me out on bail, I wasn't the same person anymore. My reputation was collapsing in real time. Neighbors avoided me, friends stopped calling, even at work people kept their distance. Everyone whispered behind my back. Worst of all, I had no home to go back to. Alice filed for divorce almost immediately after the charges were made. Hannah stayed with her. And me? I was left alone, branded a pedophile before any court had even ruled. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? Why would the kid I tried so hard to be a father to decide to destroy my life? We were never a picture-perfect family, but I drove her to school, helped with homework, bought her stuff when her mother spent money on courses and beauty products. I wasn't her best friend, but I wasn't her enemy either. And now this. At night I lay awake, rewinding every memory, looking for the moment that could explain how this accusation was born. But there was nothing. My lawyer told me that cases like this live or die on the child's testimony. If she stood there and repeated with confidence that I had touched her, my chances were slim. The only thing I had was the truth. But I was starting to realize, truth and justice don't always walk hand in hand in this country. All I could do now was wait for the trial, the moment my whole life would be decided. The first hearing felt like stepping into a cage where everyone had already chosen their side. The courtroom wasn't as glamorous as TV shows make it look. It smelled like dust and old wood, and every creak of the benches echoed like a gunshot. I sat there with my lawyer, while across the room Alice held Hannah's hand, the two of them looking like a perfect mother and daughter facing down a monster. People glanced at me with the same mixture of disgust and pity you'd give a stray dog that bit a child. I wanted to scream at them that I wasn't that man, but in their eyes, I already was. The prosecutor painted me as a manipulative stepfather who used my position of trust to prey on a vulnerable girl. They spoke as if I'd already confessed, as if my silence meant guilt. And the worst part was seeing Hannah take the stand. She was so small, so fragile, her voice trembling as she repeated the accusations. Every word stabbed through me. I had raised her since she was 9, and now she was saying things about me that I couldn't even imagine doing. She didn't look at me once. Not when she pointed her finger, not when she described things that never happened. She just kept her eyes down, clutching a tissue like it was the only thing keeping her alive. I kept waiting for her to slip up, for the judge or jury to notice the cracks in her story. But kids don't need to be perfect witnesses. They just need to sound scared. And scared she was. My lawyer whispered to me to stay calm, to trust the process, but the process felt like a slow-motion execution. Each testimony piled weight on me until I could hardly breathe. When court adjourned for the day, I walked out into the hall and felt eyes burning into me from every corner. Parents pulled their children closer when I passed. Strangers shook their heads. Even the guard assigned to escort me looked at me like he knew what I was. I wanted to vanish, to sink through the floor and disappear. At night, alone in the apartment I was renting after Alice kicked me out, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how much longer I could survive like this. The thought of prison haunted me. I'd seen enough news stories to know what happens to men accused of hurting kids. Even if I was acquitted, would I ever really be free? My name was already poisoned. My face was already tied to the ugliest label a man could have. I started drinking just to sleep. Whiskey dulled the edge of the nightmares, but it didn't stop the questions circling my head. Why was Hannah doing this? Was she afraid of Alice? Did Alice tell her to lie? Or did she actually believe this story after hearing it enough times? I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. All I felt was a twisted mix of betrayal and pity. She was still just a kid, trapped in something bigger than both of us. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the fact remained. She was the one holding the gun to my head in that courtroom. And unless something changed, I was going down. By the second week of the trial, I had stopped expecting anyone to believe me. Every morning I put on the same wrinkled suit, sat in the same wooden chair, and listened to strangers debate whether I was a predator or just unlucky enough to be accused by the wrong child. My lawyer fought for me, but even he admitted the odds weren't good. He said these cases rarely ended in acquittals. Juries believe children, especially when they cried. And Hannah cried a lot. Alice sat behind the prosecution table every day like she was watching a play she had written. She avoided looking at me directly, but every time Hannah repeated her story, Alice's lips tightened in this grim little smile. It was subtle, but I saw it, like she was satisfied. And that's when the pieces started clicking into place for me. Alice and I had been falling apart long before the police showed up. She complained that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I worked too many hours for too little pay, that I wasn't giving her the life she thought she deserved. We fought about money, about her drinking, about the way she spoiled Hannah while I tried to enforce rules. Divorce had been hanging over us for months, but she always stalled. Maybe because she didn't want to split everything 50-50. Maybe because she knew without me, she couldn't afford the house. But if I went down for what she was accusing me of, she wouldn't just get rid of me. She'd keep everything. That realization hit me like a punch in the chest. Was Hannah lying for her? Did Alice plant the story in her head? The thought made me sick, but the more I watched them together, the more it made sense. Hannah wasn't a confident liar. She looked coached, fragile, as if repeating lines she didn't fully believe. And Alice sat there squeezing her hand, guiding her through it like a stage mother. One night, after another brutal day in court, I sat in my empty apartment and thought about ending it. Just one step off the balcony, and all of it would be over. No prison, no whispers, no shame. Just silence. But I couldn't do it, because some part of me still believed the truth would come out. Some part of me still believed Hannah might break. And then came the day that changed everything. My lawyer cross-examined Hannah again, gently, carefully, and for the first time she hesitated. She stumbled over a detail. Alice squeezed her hand from the bench, urging her to keep going, but I saw it. A flicker of doubt, of guilt in her eyes. It was the smallest crack, but it was there. Walking out of the courtroom that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not much, but enough to keep breathing. Enough to keep fighting. The crack in Hannah's testimony grew wider with every session. At first, it was just a misplaced date or a detail that didn't line up. But then, during another cross-examination, my lawyer pressed her gently on where exactly things had supposedly happened. She froze. The courtroom went silent, the kind of silence where you could hear every breath. Hannah's lips trembled, and instead of answering, she looked at her mother. That look lasted only a second, but it was enough. Everyone saw it. Alice gave her this tiny nod, almost invisible, like she was feeding her the answer. The prosecutor tried to smooth it over, but the jury noticed. I saw a few of them exchange glances, eyebrows raised. For the first time, the certainty on their faces cracked. For the first time, I wasn't just the villain in their eyes. I was a possibility. My lawyer leaned into it. He requested a break, came back with a motion to dig into inconsistencies in Alice's statements too. That's when things started to unravel. Alice had told the police one version of events, then adjusted details later when Hannah spoke. The timelines didn't match. The locations didn't match. My lawyer presented documents, receipts, even traffic tickets proving I wasn't where I was supposed to be according to their story. And slowly, piece by piece, the neat little narrative began to look messy. I watched Alice's face tighten day by day. She was losing her grip. She kept holding Hannah's hand in court like she was squeezing the truth out of her. Hannah, meanwhile, looked worse with every passing hour. She avoided my eyes, avoided everyone's eyes. Really? Her voice grew softer, her pauses longer. She was breaking under the weight of it. And as much as I hated what she was doing, I could see she wasn't the mastermind here. She was a kid trapped in her mother's scheme. The day she finally broke came without warning. It was just another session, another round of questions. My lawyer asked her again about one of the nights she claimed something happened. She started crying. Not the quiet, shaky kind of crying she'd done before, but the ugly, raw kind that poured out of her like she couldn't hold it back anymore. And then, through sobs, she said it. She said her mom told her what to say, that none of it was true, that she just wanted her stepdad out of the house. The courtroom erupted. The prosecutor jumped up. The judge pounded his gavel. The gallery gasped. I just sat there, frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs. After months of hell, after nights staring at the ceiling wondering if I'd ever see freedom again, the words I thought I'd never hear came out of her mouth. I should have felt pure relief. But what I felt was something heavier, something darker. Because as much as I wanted to celebrate, all I could think about was how close I had come to losing everything. How quickly lies had almost buried me alive. And how even now, even with the truth out in the open, my name would never be clean again. After Hannah's confession, the courtroom shifted in an instant. The jury, who had been staring at me like I was already in prison orange, suddenly looked rattled. Some leaned back in their seats, others scribbled furiously in their notebooks. The prosecutor's face went pale, then red, scrambling to object, claiming the girl was confused, under pressure. But it was too late. The words had already left her mouth, and no one could stuff them back inside. The judge called for recess. I sat there, numb, my hands shaking under the table. My lawyer leaned over and whispered, "This changes everything." I wanted to believe him, but my chest was still tight with fear. I'd lived in that nightmare for so long that even hearing the truth out loud felt unreal. Like any second now someone would tell me it was all a dream. When we came back, the questioning turned on Alice. My lawyer requested that she be sworn in, and suddenly the woman who had orchestrated my destruction was the one under the microscope. She tried to stay calm, but the cracks were obvious. She contradicted herself, stumbled over dates, raised her voice when pressed. And the more she spoke, the more she revealed the venom behind it. She didn't just want me out of her life. She wanted to crush me. The jury saw it too. They weren't looking at me anymore. Their eyes were fixed on her. Even the judge's expression hardened as she spun her tangled stories. When my lawyer brought up the financial records, the debts she was drowning in, the fact that she'd get the house and support if I went to prison, it was like watching a mask get ripped off in real time. Hannah sat slumped in her seat, crying quietly, her shoulders shaking. I should have hated her, but all I felt was pity. She was just a kid caught in her mother's storm. Alice had used her like a weapon, and now the girl was breaking under the guilt. The final blow came when Hannah, still in tears, repeated that her mother told her what to say, that none of it was real. This time no one could dismiss it. The jury sat in stunned silence. The prosecutor didn't even object. Alice's face turned stone cold, her eyes flashing with the kind of fury I used to see behind closed doors when she didn't get her way. Except now the whole room could see it. When court adjourned that day, I walked out feeling lighter than I had in months. Not free, not yet, but for the first time I felt the weight shifting. The truth was finally clawing its way to the surface, and Alice's carefully built lie was collapsing around her. But even as hope crept back into me, I couldn't stop thinking. How much damage had already been done? Even if I walked out of that courthouse a free man, would I ever really be free from the stain she'd left on me? The verdict came faster than anyone expected. After Hannah's confession and Alice's collapse on the stand, the jury didn't need days of deliberation. They were out for barely 2 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, I could feel my whole body trembling. I gripped the edge of the defense table so tightly my knuckles turned white. Not guilty. 2 words. That's all it took to end the nightmare. But instead of joy, all I felt was a hollow silence ringing in my ears. My lawyer patted me on the back, whispered congratulations, but I couldn't even look at him. My eyes were locked on Alice. She sat rigid, her face pale and tight, like the verdict had been a slap. Hannah was next to her, tears streaking her face, staring down at the floor like she wanted to disappear. The judge wasn't done. The court announced that Alice would face charges for perjury and malicious prosecution. It was like a second wave crashing through the room. The same people who had once glared at me with disgust now turned their eyes on her with shock and anger. For months I had been the monster. In a single moment the roles flipped. I walked out of that courthouse a free man, but I didn't feel free. The reporters waiting outside shoved microphones at me, shouting questions, flashing cameras. I kept my head down, said nothing, and pushed through the crowd. No statement could undo what had already been done. Back at my empty apartment, I sat on the floor in the dark. My phone buzzed with messages from people I hadn't heard from in months. Old friends, coworkers, even family who had cut me off. Most of them wrote the same thing. Glad it worked out. As if it had all been just a misunderstanding. As if I hadn't been dragged through hell. None of them had been there when I needed them. None of them had believed in me when it mattered. I thought about Hannah a lot. She had destroyed me, but she was also a victim in her own way. I didn't know if she'd ever recover from what her mother made her do. And as much as I wanted to hate her, I couldn't. She was just a kid used as a pawn. The real venom, the real betrayal had always come from Alice. That night I sat by the window, staring out at the city, and felt the strangest mix of emotions. Relief, bitterness, grief. I had my freedom, but my reputation was gone. My marriage was ashes. My trust in people was shattered. Justice had come, but it was late and it was brutal. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and whispered to the empty room, "I'm still here." It didn't sound like a victory, more like survival. Freedom isn't what I thought it would be. People imagine you walk out of court after being acquitted and everything goes back to normal. But it doesn't. The world doesn't forget. Neighbors still look at me sideways when I pass them. Parents still tug their kids closer. Even though the court cleared me, the stain lingers. Once your name is dragged through the mud like that, it never really comes clean. I tried going back to work, but the whispers followed me there too. My boss offered me time off, which was just his polite way of saying I should leave. Friends who had abandoned me during the trial suddenly wanted to grab a beer, like nothing had happened. I smiled, nodded, but inside I kept thinking, where were you when I needed you? Alice is facing her own trial now. Perjury, false accusations, destroying lives for her own gain. I should feel vindicated, but honestly, I just feel tired. Tired of fighting, tired of lawyers, tired of hearing my name in courtrooms. Hannah lives with her grandparents now. I haven't seen her since the trial ended. Part of me wants to reach out to tell her I don't hate her, that I know she was manipulated. But I don't know if she'd even want to hear from me. Maybe one day, maybe never. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if that knock on the door had never happened. Would I still be married? Would I still believe in people the way I used to? Those questions eat at me, but there's no answer. The only thing I know for sure is that the person I was before all this is gone. What's left is someone harder, quieter, but still breathing. If there's a lesson in this, it's that lies are heavier than truth. They crush faster, deeper, and they don't need proof to destroy you. The truth crawled out eventually, but it nearly came too late. And if Hannah hadn't broken, if her conscience hadn't won for just a moment, I wouldn't be here telling this story. So here I am, scarred but alive. And if you've watched this far, if you've sat with me through this nightmare, I'll ask one thing. Support the channel. Hit like, subscribe, share the story. Not because it's entertainment, but because stories like mine happen more often than you think. And maybe, just maybe, the more people hear them, the harder it becomes for lies to win.